Welcome back to more Summertime from the Bridge. I'm Rick Jones, captain of FishBait Marketing and your weekly host. We're going to continue to talk today more about bait. I'd be remiss if I didn't remind my listeners that I think bait is the single most important part of sponsorship sales, and bait is also the most essential part of why a company will sponsor anything. We're also going to get to hear from one of my clients, Sean Lupton of Opry Entertainment in Nashville, the group that owns and manages both the Grand Ole Opry and the famous Mother Church of Country Music, the historic Ryman Auditorium. And we'll share another amazing place to eat on the road with Rick. Last week, we started discussing the various things that are bait for selling sponsorships, namely the assets in your tackle box to offer a potential sponsor. While most, if not all, corporate sponsorship packages include multiple assets, last week we focused on the single one key element that made many famous sponsorship programs become so successful. But today we're going to go a little deeper and look at some what I call unusual baits. And I call these my 4 lures. So the first lure out of the tackle box is what I call icing. This is where the company already has a position with the type of property that you sell, and that you sell them an activation element of something they're already doing rather than a new sponsorship. And a great example of that is several years ago, I had the opportunity to sell a sponsorship for the American Football Coaches Association to Allstate Insurance. Allstate, longtime sponsor of college football. They sponsor the Sugar Bowl. They sponsor the college football playoff. They sponsor the field goal nets at many of the schools around the country. They already had a strong appetite for college football. The AFCA had a special program called the Good Works Team. And the Good Works Team is a team of student athletes that are nominated by their coaches and athletic directors for their community service. And so these are people that actually give back, and it's amazing what some of these student athletes have done in terms of starting foundations or leading bone marrow transplants or all sorts of amazing things. So I felt like it was a perfect fit for Allstate. The Allstate Good Hands, Good Works team just made so much sense. Well, I thought that, and I presented it to their agency, IMG, who presented it to the client, and the client said no. The second year, I decided I'll make another run at them and did it again and made the same run because I felt like it was so perfect for them. And once again, they told me no. Well, a funny thing happened on the way to the forum. In the third year, Allstate got a new sponsorship director, Patrick Pierce. And going through his files, he found the proposal. And he called me and said, Rick, I'm sure this thing's not available anymore, is it? And I said, no, Patrick, actually, it still is available because it's perfect for you. And so he bought it, and now they're in, I think, year 16 or 17 of being the sponsor of the AFCA Good Works team. Now, again, this was an icing strategy. We also previously mentioned that we had a lot of success doing this with the College Football Hall of Fame. And we're also trying to do the same with the Mascot Hall of Fame, where we're focused on companies that already have corporate mascots. So we're not asking you to do something that you're unfamiliar with. We're asking you to put icing on a cupcake that you've already baked. The second lure I want to talk about today is what I call a media enhancement. And that's where we have an added value off-channel asset to enhance an existing media buy. And one of the best examples was Infiniti Automobiles had a position with ESPN to be the presenting sponsor of their Saturday night college basketball showcase. Well, anybody can do an ad. How do you plus that up? And the way we plussed it up was we used college coaches. And we created a thing called the Infiniti Coaches Charity Challenge, where each of the coaches that participated selected their own charity. And we promoted those charity challenges through a series of vignettes leading into the broadcast with a strong digital and social presence, and then fans could vote for their favorite coach's charity. And ultimately, one coach won $100,000 for his charity, and every coach got some money for their charity for participating. This is an example of a media enhancement that overlaid what they were already doing. The third lure I want to talk about today is what I call the spear gun. And that is a sponsor really trying to reach a narrow subset of a macro audience. A lot of times we talk about scale or we talk about frequency and reach, but what happens when you want to reach a very narrow audience versus a broader audience? Well, a few years ago, ESPN came to me and said, hey, we need help selling the Rose Bowl, and we've got a lead that Fidelity may have some interest in it, but I'm looking for an added value component for Fidelity. Well, one of my clients at the time was the National Football Foundation, and they do select members to the College Football Hall of Fame each year. And as part of that, they do on-campus presentations. Well, what Fidelity was really interested in was not the broad audience, but the narrow audience of those administrators on campuses that actually bought financial services on behalf of professors and other people that worked there. And so they were really looking to find the benefits administrator and have that person be involved with Fidelity. Fidelity was number 2 at the time to TIAA-CREF in terms of the number of universities that used them for pension programs for their professors and staff. And so we ended up doing a partnership between Fidelity and the National Football Foundation where Fidelity sponsors those Hall of Fame salutes on those campuses. And oh, by the way, guess who happens to show up for those? A Fidelity executive, the athletic director, the honoree, and oh yes, the benefits administrator. And from that, Fidelity was perceived as giving back to the university and gave them a unique position. And they've been doing this now for a number of years. Again, we call this the spear gun. I'm shooting at a single fish rather than a school of fish. The fourth lure is what I call the balance beam. And this is a way that I try to persuade a client to balance their portfolio to reach a different audience. When we worked for the Women's Basketball Coaches Association, we would go to all the sponsors of the National Association of Basketball Coaches, the men's coaches, and remind them that they needed to sponsor the women's coaches too. They didn't have to do it at a commensurate level. They didn't have to spend the same amount of money, but we told them it would be more politically correct for them to spend some money in women's basketball versus, alienating that entire audience by not participating. State Farm has done this successfully. If you look at State Farm's portfolio in basketball, they are the sponsor of the NBA. They are the sponsor of the USA basketball team. They were for a long time a sponsor of the NCAA. They're not anymore, but they are a sponsor of numerous universities and schools. They're the sponsor of College Basketball Game Day, powered by State Farm. But they needed to get younger. And so one of the things they do is they sponsor the annual State Farm Slam Dunk Three-Point Challenge at the Final Four. Intersport, an agency out of Chicago, produces that, has for a number of years. And it's a highly rated show against that younger segment that they're trying to reach, those young adults before they make decisions about which insurance company they're going to choose. And, State Farm, Allstate, others now, they're in a war with those online the Esurances of the world and the Progressives of the world and the Geicos of the world where you can go online and buy insurance without using an agent. And State Farm wanted to have a position with that. So we call that the balance beam. How do you find a different audience and adjust your portfolio to reach that audience? Now, here's what I know. Fly fishermen tie custom flies. And customization is your best differential when you start thinking about bait. So here's a few other random bait ideas for today. The first one is I call a customer of one. What happens when you don't really want to reach anybody but exactly one person? Mark McCormick, the legendary founder of IMG, told a great story. He said in about 1962, he was representing Jack Nicklaus at the time, and a president of a railroad company came to him and said, Mark, I'm trying to do some business with this Japanese industrialist. And this Japanese industrialist loves golf, and he loves Nicklaus. What would it take for me to get Jack to play a round of golf with him? Well, Mark thought about it and said, Jack hasn't been to Japan. I'd like to get him to Japan. We could build some other things around, a trip to Japan, and he could play golf with the guy. So Mark arranged it and said, I tell you what, pay Jack $10,000 and pay his travel expenses to Japan, and he'll do that. And so Jack did. Well, Mark kind of forgot about it. And about 17 or 18 months later, he was at a cocktail party, and he bumped into the same president of the railroad company. And he said, hey, how did it ever go with Jack? He said, oh, God, it was tremendous. He had a great time. He said, well, did you ever do any business with that Japanese industrialist? And he said, yeah, $22 million. McCormick said, I should have said, pay him $10,000, pay his travel expenses, and give me 5% of whatever you get. The guy would have done it. And so in this case, this sponsorship was about an audience of one, a customer of one, and not broad. A second bait idea is to advertise where it counts. And one of my favorite examples of that is a few years ago, Special K cereal came out with a strawberry-flavored Special K. And they launched it in January. And now let's think about January. January is the month when every woman and every man in America has decided they're going to lose weight. But where could Special K most effectively reach women in a way to tell them they could lose weight? Well, they bought ads in dressing rooms of department stores. So you went in and tried on the size 6 and found out you wore 10 and decided maybe Special K would be a great example, a great way for me to lose some weight. I thought it was a really funny way and a very appropriate way to do that. Guys, we know that many times that when we go to arenas and stadiums, we go to urinals, and there's always an ad over the urinal because we're going to look straight ahead, and it's aimed at a man with a male product because that's going to be appealing to men because last time I checked, there are only men at urinals. The third bait idea I have for you today is what I call try being outrageous. And here was a great example of that. When the Mini Cooper first was created and released in America, there was a dealer in Miami that decided that the best way to get people to test drive the new Mini Cooper was to charge them. Now, that's outrageous. So what he told everybody was, our car is so cool that you got to pay $10 for a test drive. But, oh, by the way, I'm going to give all $10 away to charity. And it was amazingly successful because people felt like if you had to pay for a test drive, this must be one heck of a car. And he ended up being the leading Mini Cooper dealer in America through that outrageous promotion. We talked earlier on our show about Roger Enrico, who was the guy who invented the Pepsi Challenge in Dallas, where he had nothing to lose because he had little share. And that program became so successful that not only did they continue the Pepsi Challenge throughout the country, it ultimately forced Coke to change their formula and come out with new Coke. And maybe most importantly, it evolved for young Roger Enrico. He later became the CEO of PepsiCo. So being outrageous sometimes, I think, can be a true competitive advantage. I wanted to finish up today talking about a few examples of what I call eco-centric sponsorships or marketing campaigns. And here are a few. The first one is what I call style over substance. And a great example of that is the Dos Equis Most Interesting Man in the World campaign. If you remember during that era that if you wanted to sell beer to guys, you had babes in bikinis. Well, they didn't do that. They had this old guy, but he was an old guy that had lived a very rich life. And every young beer drinker said, I want to grow up to be that old guy. Image above everything else. Here's another example of that. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Both campaigns allows the consumer to interpret their own story. When I looked at the most interesting man in the world, I could decide how I wanted to be interesting and how I wanted to emulate that guy. I can make up my own Vegas story because what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. And we call this conceptual balance, the ability to have a thematic, but that thematic to be interpreted by an individual consumer. A second example is what I call the cast. And when you're fishing, you have to make a good cast to try to hit fish in the right place. A few years ago, one of our clients was Under Armour, and Under Armour decided to be a sponsor of the National Association of Basketball Coaches, but they wanted to do a party. And Under Armour's parties were legendary at the Final Four. But the way they drove the invitation was, in order to get an invitation to the party, you had to come by their booth in their trade show and physically pick up the invitation. That drove you to their trade show booth where they were able to have a conversation with you about their products. They not only did that, but they charged a $5 entry fee. Again, they said, our party is so good, you're willing to pay for it. But what they did was they matched that $5 with their own $5 for $10 that they used to buy tennis shoes for the Samaritan's Feet organization. So you knew not only did you come to the party and have a good time, but coming to the party, you were able to have a new pair of shoes for some child around the world. Pretty interesting program called The Cast. The next one we call Fishing in Uncharted Waters. Several years ago, we had the tragic BP oil spill in the Gulf. Well, we took BP oil spill money in the state of Alabama, and we bought a sponsorship of the Southeastern Conference for our client, Gulf Shores and Orange Beach Tourism. And if you know about that stretch of what we call the Redneck Riviera down there in Lower Alabama, or LA for short, it's a very, very small strip of land. But if you looked at the geographic footprint of the SEC, it's almost like a funnel geographically that funnels you down to that strip of beach. And so we bought the sponsorship of the Southeastern Conference, and we came up with a theme called Where SEC Families Come to Play. And in our creative, we used former coaches, not as coaches, but as grandfathers. And we had amazing ads. We had a great ad with Coach Pat Dye, the former coach at Auburn, where we had a little boy on the beach at Orange Beach, and he said, Coach Dye said, we must protect this house. And, of course, Auburn was and continues to be an Under Armour school, and you thought maybe that was what it was going to be. And then you realized, no, the house was a sandcastle that the little boy had built on the beach. And then the little boy turned to Coach Dye and said, Coach Dye, do I need to worry about the tide? Coach Dye said, son, we never worry about the tide. And so it was just a great spot. We had so many other great spots. One of my favorite stories is we did one on Gulf seafood. And we had each of our coaches representing their school and their school colors in a certain form of fish. And so we had Jerry Stovall from LSU had yellowfin tuna because of the colors of LSU. We had Philip Fulmer of Tennessee have orange roughy. We had Coach Dye again do blue crabs. We had Frank Broyles do redfish. And finally, Coach Stallings say, well, with all this great Gulf seafood, don't you have something in crimson? He was the former coach at Alabama. Well, we rehearsed it over and over and over. Coach Dye would say, I think I'll have the blue crabs. And then Coach Fulmer would say, I think I'll have the orange roughy. And then Coach Stovall said, I'll have the yellowfin tuna. Well, when it got to Coach Broyles, he said, I'll have the fried catfish. I said, Coach, you're supposed to say, I'll have the red snapper. He said, yeah, I know, Rick, but I really wanted the catfish. I said, Coach, we'll get you the catfish. Just read your line. It was a really funny time and a great campaign. We also created a special event called the SEC Beach Fest, a weekend of activities of fun and football and lots of things that we did there. We had merchant participation, the hotels, the condos, the restaurants, the attractions in Orange Beach participate. We had sponsors, other sponsors of the Southeastern Conference that participated with fan interactives, for both the SEC and those sponsors. The next one is also, and I'll use an example from Gulf Shores and Orange Beach, and this is the one we call the Guest of Honor. And this is where you create a by invitation only special event within a special event. So you take an event like maybe a trade show, that everybody can attend, but then you carve out something that only a few select people can do. And so you have a guest speaker in an intimate setting for your best prospects, your best customers, your best associates, and you have a Q&A potentially by those attendees. Well, mentioning the SEC Beach Fest, we had 3 current head coaches make appearances. Nick Saban, Gene Chizik at the time at Auburn, and Les Miles, who at that time was at LSU. And as part of that, they did a special roundtable discussion in our corporate VIP hospitality area, only available for those that had bought those VIP level tickets. I think this is a big idea. The last bait idea I call fish on the line. And this is one I got from a military attraction that they give out numbered dog tags at trade shows. And the recipients check once a week to see if their number has won prizes. And there's a choice of prizes for the winners. It's a big idea because it facilitates constant communication because the prospect opts to go to their website and choose the prize. And they go back repeatedly because they've got the dog tag with the serial number on it to check to make sure that it does that. And so there's a way to give a premium away that allows you to have people to have repeat trips to your social site or your digital site on an ongoing basis. So let me close this segment by saying the combination of properties, architecture, the assets engineering, and customized sponsor bait will create the perfect proposition for the perfect prospect that you've qualified. So next week, we're going to discuss how to qualify a prospect. Now, here's today's Tuesday tip. You know, I'm constantly amazed at what people give away as premiums at event engagements. Usually stuff people don't want, or what they give as corporate gifts to customers, or how they reward the people that help them along the way. You know, I give a lot of speeches, and it seems like at the conclusion of every one of those, someone gives me a plaque to say how much they appreciated my speech. Now, no offense, but I don't need any more plaques. Where am I supposed to put them? I also don't need any more koozies, logoed ink pens, coffee mugs, baseball caps, or keychains. I don't have enough drawers for all of these. No one else does either. Starbucks gift cards are always appreciated, and so is cash. And thank you can never be used enough. Let me give you a story of a really, truly memorable gift. In 1987, I was the marketing director for the Nabisco Championships at Oak Hills Country Club in San Antonio, Texas. The Nabisco Championships was the first tour championship. The tour championship is now held every year at East Lake Country Club in Atlanta. And it's the season-ending event of what is now called the FedEx Cup. Well, at that time, Nabisco Brands was the sponsor of the season-long PGA Tour. And so we had the Nabisco Championships with the top 32 money winners competing for a big prize at that point of $2.5 million in a purse. That tournament actually was the last regular PGA Tour event that Tom Watson won. Well, I worked for a guy named Mike Reichman. Mike worked for Olmeyer Communications, who managed the Nabisco business. And he tried to figure out what was the best gift to give the players. Okay, not sponsors, not Pro-Am competitors, but the actual 32 players that were playing. Now, what are you going to give a PGA Tour player? A visor or a putter, sleeve of balls? I don't think so. What Mike did was he went out and he got the Justin Boot Company to come to San Antonio on Monday on practice round day. And they brought like 2,000 styles of boots, and each of the 32 players got to pick out the style they liked. They custom fit them, and during the week they made them and delivered them to them by the weekend. What a great gift that said, thank you for coming to San Antonio. Thank you for being a part of the inaugural Nabisco Championship. Several years later, I ran into Ben Crenshaw, and Ben told me, Rick, I still have my boots. Now that is a memorable gift, and that's your Tuesday tip. My guest angler today is Sean Lupton, Vice President of Brand Partnerships at Opry Entertainment Group. In addition to the Grand Ole Opry and the Ryman Auditorium, They also own and manage the Old Red nightclubs that are in a partnership with Blake Shelton, and they have plans to open up a lot of those around the country. Sean came to the Opry Entertainment Group after a long career with Gannett newspapers, and he's brought fresh thinking, new events, and new sponsors to his properties at Opry. Let's welcome Sean to the show. Hey, Sean, welcome to From the Bridge.
Hey, Rick, my pleasure. Happy to be here.
Well, give us a little bit about your background before you came to the Opry team.
Yeah, absolutely. So I spent about 20 years in and around media and traditionally in print media. I did consulting for Coles Publishing out of Spokane, Washington, years and years ago, and traveled the country and worked and did consulting at newspapers in their sales departments. Got lured away by a newspaper in Chattanooga for a couple of years and ran the major metro market there on the retail side, and then ended up joining Gannett and USA Today here in Nashville at the Tennessean, and worked majors and national accounts for them for many years, and more recently was the general manager of a couple of different community newspapers in the Middle Tennessee area. So had a wonderful experience with them. Really joined newspapers at a very transitional time when they were really reshaping from what just a print media company was doing to implementing, partnerships with Yahoo and Google and creating internal agencies that did web dev and things of that nature. So really brought a lot of different experiences, kind of to the table. And we figured out how to fail fast. That's for sure, which is always a good thing. But very, very a different kind of a time, for traditional media. And then had the opportunity to move over to the entertainment kind of side with the Grand Ole Opry and have been here a year last week, actually.
Well, Gannett was such a famous company for innovations. I remember when USA Today first came out, and it was a little bit like ESPN where people said, oh, nobody's going to buy a 24-hour sports network. People said nobody's going to buy a newspaper for the nation, and yet they proved that to be wrong. And then you mentioned really they were the leader in the digital transformation of local newspapers. And I think some of that background for you has got to be helpful to the Opry as we look to, I think, more what I call digitize the Opry experience. Talk about some of the things you're doing there with content and with the net.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that Gannett was very good at was aggregating data, particularly at the end of end of my time with Gannett. We were looking at how people interacted with stories, how that drove content. I'll give you a great example. The sports department, instead of focusing on the score and what necessarily happened at the game last night, we assumed that people knew what the score was and had already had the score, and that was quote unquote old news. And so the focus shifted to how does that impact the next game, or how does that impact certain players and things of that nature, and try to take a more analytical role. At the Opry, we've looked at how does the audience interact with the artist directly. How does the show itself evolve and continue to evolve? Obviously, it's an institution from that standpoint, but how are people interacting with that? What artists are resonating? What kinds of music is resonating, whether that be more Americana or crossover, things of that nature, and want to put together, a variety show like we've kind of always done. But you'll see, I think, more up-and-coming artists on the Opry, a real focus on innovation in the music itself, as well as how the audience can consume, that music. And we're certainly investing in experiences, and whether that's the daytime tour experience at the Grand Ole Opry and the backstage, experience to trying to get a much more intimate experience for folks that are attending the Opry, and using data to kind of help us with that.
Well, you've also got so much content. I am, if you look at the history of, 90 plus years of the Opry and the historical footage, the historical recordings, right up till today, what are you going to do with that content? What's kind of your content play?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, I mean, we're blessed, obviously, with having a rich library of not only things that happened on the Opry, but that happened kind of adjacent to, for lack of a better term, and from some of the memorabilia we have. I'm always amazed when I just walk in and start looking at the walls and pay attention to some of the pictures and some of the signed guitars or a signed fiddle and things of that nature. But one of the things that we've just announced is a partnership with Gray TV. And we think that there is an underserved part of the country music lifestyle consumer out there. And not that I can disclose here a ton of what that's going to look like, but I can tell you it's a very exciting time for us, and we're exploring certainly things that can be on a Netflix type platform and others where we'll really be able to bring some of those stories to life if you can't come to Nashville and experience it necessarily firsthand. And thinking about how the artists themselves are interacting with their fans and looking at new fans and how we can help, those artists do that and really kind of cultivate, a rich ecosystem and environment for country music in general, and then how the Opry can play on its heritage, but also really focus on new and innovative things. We're attending Bonnaroo and Stagecoach, as an example of ways we're trying to take the Opry out of the Opry.
Well, the best country songs always tell a story. And then there's a story of how that person wrote that song. And then there's a story about how that person heard that song and wanted to record that song. Then there's the story about what that song meant to a consumer who heard that song, or maybe that song was the song they played at their wedding. And so, it really is all about the story. Past, present, and future stories, I think, is really the heritage of the Opry.
Yeah, I would agree. And we've tried to do that. If you get a chance, or somebody coming to Nashville gets a chance to experience the new Opry tour, we really had an antiquated, in my mind, tour experience before that. We kind of let the building speak for itself. And we didn't do a good job of telling the story of the Opry through the artist's perspective. And this is something that literally has just opened in the last 4 weeks, where Trisha Yearwood and Garth Brooks helped us out and really told the story of the Opry from an Opry member's perspective. And then there's even a portion of, hey, if you can't attend a show, here's what it looks like, right before the show happens, and a kind of behind the scenes, look from that standpoint. And then you get to go backstage and see where those dressing rooms and see where kind of all that magic happened. But it does a much more effective job of telling the Opry story, from the perspective of the artists. And that was important to us.
Well, you mentioned Bonnaroo and Stagecoach. I have to assume that when you're in those locales, your music mix is a little bit different because you've got a different audience.
It is. We still try to maintain the richness of what the Opry experience is. And in that, it really is a variety show. You are going to see 6 to 8 different acts on any given night at the Opry. And some of those can be, an up and coming type of artists, heritage artists that have well-established hits, but might not be, touring at this time because they're in that stage of their career, and generally very contemporary and current, chart toppers and hit makers. That you're going to get all that into kind of one show. As an example, when we did the Bonnaroo this year, you had Old Crow Medicine Show as kind of a headliner for Bonnaroo, but you also had, other up-and-coming artists, some Opry Next Stage, type of artists with Riley Green and Travis Denning. You had a good variety, and it really painted the Opry in kind of a different light.
Well, tell our listeners exactly what the Opry Next Stage program is. I know it's designed to focus on younger emerging artists, but talk a little bit about it, who these people are, where they come from. Yeah.
Absolutely. So we have obviously had a long history of really trying to raise artists' profiles and provide a spotlight, so to speak, for an artist and to accelerate their career. And this program kind of took that to the next level, we are obviously not a label. We are not a booking agency, and we're not artist management from that standpoint. But what we've done is partner with several of the big artist management companies, so Sony, Big Machine, you name it, and identified an artist that both we thought and that agency's management thought was going to had a bright future, for lack of a better term, had a bright future. And how could we work with them to accelerate their career? And this is the first year of that program. So the inaugural class has Riley Green and Travis Denning, Tennille Towns, and Tegan Marie. And all of those have very different, audiences necessarily, but some have some overlap. And we've really focused on putting them, providing Opry marketing behind them, giving them opportunities to play at events that they might not have normally played at, and really trying to accelerate their career through exposure through the Opry channels as well as their labels channels.
Well, it's a great thing to be able to play the Opry. If you grew up a fan of country music as a child and you started, playing the piano or playing the guitar at an early age, and, that had to be the destination that everybody wants. And now you're giving these young artists a chance to play on the Opry for the first time. Talk a little bit about that, what it's like for, someone that's been playing, honky tonks in their small towns. And the next thing you know, they're on the stage of the Grand Ole Opry, or they're on the stage of the Ryman Auditorium. That's got to be very special.
Everybody's path to how they got there is a little bit different, and some are a hell of a lot longer, than others. And a lot of artists would agree with that. We have about 30 to 45 Opry debuts in any given year, meaning there's 30 to 45 different artists that make their debut at the Opry. And we actually memorialize that, and we have a content series that we put together not only for the artists but for their fans and just fans of country music in general, where we will document that experience. And obviously it adds to our archives, but it gives the artists also something very memorable that they can keep and use, to promote themselves. But when they step into the circle, and the story of the circle, for those that don't know, is a cutout of the original Ryman stage at the Ryman. So the Opry moved from the Ryman Auditorium in downtown Nashville in 1974 and is in its current home here at the Grand Ole Opry, where basically the show outgrew the venue in terms of the popularity. But we took a piece of that stage, and so that stepping in the circle is kind of stepping in where all of the, the Roy Acuffs and the Minnie Pearls and the Johnny Cashes, played and stepped into that circle. So that there's a piece of that on the current Grand Ole Opry stage. And again, it's very different for every artist, but it is usually quite a thrill to not only make their debut, and then the next step in that is being asked to become an Opry member. There are only 68 living and performing Opry members currently.
That's amazing.
And actually, tomorrow night, Luke Combs will become the next member of the Grand Ole Opry. And I'm often asked, how does one become a member of the Grand Ole Opry? And there's several artists that you would know, and from Little Big Town to Carrie Underwood to Darius Rucker to Blake Shelton, that are members. And there are others that aren't. And there's no written criteria. It is really a combination of factors, including a love of the Opry itself and a level of chart success and things of that. There's a lot of intangibles, but it is certainly a very special and memorable experience for those artists that get that honor and receive that honor.
Well, we record here in my hometown of Charleston, South Carolina, and Darius Rucker lives down here, and I know what an honor it was for Darius and how special it was when he was invited to become a member of the Opry.
Yeah, I'll tell you a funny story about that, and not about his induction night in general, but every member has a bronze plaque inside the Grand Ole Opry. When you first come in, they have a mailbox. You can actually send them mail at the Grand Ole Opry, and they have their name immortalized in a bronze plaque. And every time Darius comes into the Opry, he kind of rubs that bronze plaque. and he rubs it coming in and he rubs it coming out. Well, over time, that bronze plaque of his has faded a little bit. You can actually touch that and feel that and go, well, why isn't so-and-so's artist, that's a little faded there, and that's just kind of one of his things that he does when he plays the Opry. And that just shows how much, that means to him.
Well, you mentioned the Ryman, the mother church. It's still a very, very, very special, place. Anytime I'm at the Ryman, I think about the ghost. It's almost like you can see Hank Williams or Elvis Presley or, Minnie Pearl or all the greats that played there. What makes that building so unique?
I think, Rick, it starts with the history. Very few theaters are 140 plus years old, and still standing for one, and then have that charm. With it, it is a very intimate environment. It only seats 2,200. But there is a multi-million-dollar sound system in this building, this 140-year-old theater, and I think the combination of the history of the building, the unbelievable sound system, and flat out how close you are as a fan to the stars that are playing that stage, just makes it something special. I mean, and the great thing about the Ryman, in my opinion, is, it's truly a venue that all genres of music will play, from country to hip hop to contemporary rock. I mean, just this year alone, we've had John Mellencamp and we've had the Wu-Tang Clan. I mean, you never know kind of who's going to play the Ryman. And certainly we market that venue differently than we would market the Grand Ole Opry. It is obviously very much a tourist destination and tour product by day, but by night it is a full functioning concert, venue, and a lot of the local Nashville, Middle Tennessee residents get to enjoy those shows. But it's also a destination. We have folks from all over the country that just want to experience a show at the Ryman, and there is something going on inside that building 300 plus nights per year. And it allows us to really do some fun crossover things. And of course, the Opry actually goes to the Ryman for 3 months a year. In the months of December, January, and February, you can catch an Opry show at the Ryman Auditorium.
Yeah, that's a really special event to think about. A Grand Ole Opry show in the site of the original show and all that. We had the chance to work together on the Opry Salutes the SEC as part of the SEC basketball tournament in Nashville. The SEC's pretty much made Nashville the permanent home of college basketball for them, like they've done in Atlanta with their football championship. Talk a little bit about that show and how that all came together. Yeah,
absolutely. I think, it started with certainly the audience, that both the SEC and the Grand Ole Opry have a rich and highly engaged audience. And in working with you and the SEC, we just saw there was so much overlap and so much synergy there that it was one of those, why hadn't we done this sooner, kind of mentalities. And of course, music plays in the sense that it crosses over socioeconomics and gender and interests and things of that nature. It really can resonate. And I think one of the things the SEC thought was, how can they enhance their programming and create a fun, engaging fan experience? And selfishly, we thought, gosh, how in the heck can we get in front of the SEC audience, which is so huge and diverse and highly engaged? And so it came together in a way that allowed us to create an event that really capitalized on an Opry show and all of that programming that comes with that, and provide a really fun and engaging fan experience as an extension of a basketball tournament. On a Saturday night when there wasn't a basketball game being played, and allowed, a lot of cross-marketing opportunities and a lot of contesting and like I said, fun fan engagement, and from artists being on, Paul Feinbaum's show, and providing exposure for those artists to, fans coming in. Obviously, a lot of Kentucky fans come in. We purposely programmed, Ricky Skaggs from Kentucky for that show. And there's obviously a lot of Tennessee fans were here because they had a good team this year as well. So we, purposely programmed, the singer of Rocky Top, and he did that, rendition, right there during the show, which was great. So it really allowed for a lot of fun, and that was the whole goal of that kind of a partnership.
Well, it was pretty special to hear Bobby Osborne sing a song that he had recorded over 60 years ago called Rocky Top that has become the theme song for the University of Tennessee Volunteers. And it was also special for me. Greg Sankey's the commissioner of the Southeastern Conference. He's a big country music fan, and for him to be on the stage and be part of it. And then Jimmy Dykes, who's one of my favorite people, Jimmy's actually has written some songs. He's a songwriter, and for him to, as he said, get to play the Opry, where he got to be a guest announcer, I think he would consider to be one of the most special evenings of his career. And obviously we were fortunate enough to get Belk Department Stores to be the title sponsor of that. I believe, like you believe, that the Opry products, the Grand Ole Opry, the Ryman Auditorium, are undervalued from a sponsorship standpoint. We reach a very rich, diverse, loyal, national, and in some cases international audience. Talk about the opportunities for brands to partner with you guys.
Well, I tell you what, it's interesting in that we have purposefully not targeted. We don't have a lot of partners. We prefer to not go out and make it look like a big sporting arena or anything like that. So the brands we partner with, and we're very selective in that, really have an opportunity to engage and be very visible, at our properties. We target really just 3 to 5 core partners, and they have a rich opportunity to do not only in-venue branding, because that's a given, but really create. We will work with them to create custom content. I'll give you an example. Nissan is a partner with us at the Ryman Auditorium, and we've created a backstage at the Ryman product presented by Nissan and shot a completely custom commercial for Nissan to kind of bookend that content that was very authentic and very real. And it allows them to, have that association. It allows their social media teams, as an example, to push that content and allows us, obviously, the opportunity to do some fun and cool things. And we've created events at our venues to give other engaging opportunities, contests, experience Nashville package. We'll do flyaways, with Southwest Airlines and others where, if you can't come to Nashville, we want to give you an opportunity to really, experience that through a contest and through a third-party brand. But between kind of content, hospitality offerings, in-venue exposure, there's just a wealth of things that you can do that can really drive your brand without necessarily being tied to one or two artists. You kind of have that association of being tied to the genre in general, and that allows for a lot of flexibility.
All good stuff. Let's close with one final question. I know y'all have a partnership with Blake Shelton on Old Red restaurants and clubs. Talk a little bit about that and expansion plans for Old Red.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a really exciting thing. We again saw that there was a opportunity to have that people wanted to experience a really authentic country music, where with up and coming stars and established stars, but they couldn't make it to Nashville all the time to be able to do that. And so we have a great partnership with Opry member Blake Shelton and created a brand called Old Red. And it is kind of a high-end restaurant, music venue, bar, honky-tonk, for lack of a better term. But it gives people the opportunity to kind of experience what Lower Broadway on Nashville feels like in other cities. And we have a location in Oklahoma, in Tishmingo, Oklahoma, which is Blake's hometown. We've got one in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. We've got one in downtown Nashville, Tennessee. We'll have one in Orlando in spring of 2020, and there are plans to announce several more of those locations. But it really kind of takes that House of Blues kind of feel, but it is a very authentic country music venue, and you can go in and enjoy, dinner or lunch and drinks, and then just sit back and really enjoy a concert experience. We're not necessarily passing the hat around for tips like you see in a lot of the downtown Nashville honky tonks. These are elevated artists. A lot are signed by a label already and are just kind of in their infancy. And then you never know who's going to pop by. Many a time Blake Shelton has just walked out there, or Chris Jansen or Kelsey Ballerini have all played the Old Red stage. And one of the things that we're looking at is how do we create residencies for some of these artists at those venues as we expand them and allow them to, play in Las Vegas or Orlando for, a week or two and give folks a chance to really experience that without having to make necessarily the trip to Nashville.
Well, that's good stuff. We may call it the Grand Ole Opry and Old Red, but there's nothing old about country music today. Sean, thanks again for joining us from the bridge.
Hey, my pleasure, Rick. Appreciate the opportunity to connect with you.
Let's close today's show with another segment of On the Road with Rick. A few weeks back, my wife and I had a chance to celebrate our 34th wedding anniversary, and we went up to New York for a show at Feinstein's. And then we had a quick trip over to New Jersey to see my brother Steve and my nieces and nephew. And then we spent a week on the North Fork of Long Island, staying in Greenport. While we were there, we visited wineries and we ate a lot of terrific food. But one of our favorite places was a place in downtown Greenport called Noah's. And Noah's is owned and operated by Chef Noah Schwartz, and his wife, Sanita, is actually the sommelier who selects the wines to match the food. Now, they have great entrees there, but the night we were there, we actually shared 5 different appetizers. And here's what we had. We first had a Frito Misto that was as good as anything I've ever had, with baby artichokes, asparagus, and green beans. A really unusual Frito Misto with a aioli basil sauce that was just phenomenal. Secondly, we had a beet and peaches salad with whipped feta that, let me tell you, it was magnificent. We had a picoteau crab cake with a curry coleslaw. I'd never had coleslaw with curry. I'm going to make that from now on. It was amazing. Then we had a grilled asparagus with a poached egg and fried shallots that was amazing. And then to top it off, we had the best appetizer maybe I've ever had. We had a red crab mini tacos with pickled red onions. There are great restaurants all over the North Fork, but Noah's is very, very special. That's our show for today. We hope you'll join us again next week from the bridge.
This has been your captain, Rick Jones, from the bridge. If you like what you hear, please share, subscribe, and leave a 5-star review on your favorite podcast directory.